and welcome to the Prince Hall Think Tank, a monthly conversation amongst Prince Hall Freemasons where we discuss topics relative to craft Freemasonry. My name is Antonio Caffey, and I currently serve as the Worshipful Master of the Corey Adams Lodge of Research and Education, and I'm a proud past master of St. Mark's Lodge number 7, both being subordinate lodges of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio. I also have the privilege of serving as the Right Worshipful Grand Historian of that Grand Lodge. Before I let the other brothers introduce themselves, I'd like to state that the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the Grand Lodges in which we hold membership in. Also, if you have any questions for us tonight, please feel free to post them in our Facebook or on our Facebook page, and if we have time near the end of the broadcast, we'll be happy to answer some of them. At this time, I'll let the other brethren introduce themselves. Brother Collins.
Good evening, everybody. This is Ken Collins. I serve as the Right Worshipful Grand Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. I'm a proud member of, say my old lodge's name, Pride of North Birmingham Lodge number 319 in Birmingham, Alabama. Grand Masters Corey Hawkins, as well as my Worshipful Master is Tim Sanford. Just want to give a shout out to them, but I also want to give my housekeeping notes to Brother Caffey and Corey Adams Lodge, Research Lodge. We can't say thank you guys enough for what you're doing, because this is actually bringing a conversation on Prince Hall Freemasonry, but more of the idea and concept of research as a whole to the craft from around the globe. So again, we want to thank you so much for even having this idea for us to be able to participate.
Thank you, brother. Brother Morgan.
Good evening, everybody. I am James Morgan III. I currently serve as Worshipful Master, Corinthian Lodge number 18. Just was re-elected on Tuesday, so shout out to the brothers of my lodge for blessing me with that opportunity. I hail from the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and happy to be back. Hope everybody enjoyed the Turkey Day.
And Brother Gillon.
Hey, my name is Dave Gillum Jr. I'm a past master of the Mount Episcopal Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia. And I also had the pleasure of serving as the Worshipful Grand Historian for the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia. Hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. I know I did. And I'm looking forward to the show.
All right. Thank you, brothers. So tonight's topic is the belief, the battle, the victory. Prince Hall Freemasons that fought for justice in America. Throughout the history of Freemasonry, many of its members have championed various causes in America. While many Prince Hall individual lodges played a huge part in the building of the fabric of our communities, it's been the individual brother that fought for the rights for individuals in this country. Tonight, we're going to look at and highlight just a few of those good brothers. Obviously, this is a very, very small sampling size of the brethren that did have an impact on society in America. And as always, we urge you to do some research on the other brothers that have had an impact as well. All right. So without further ado, Brother Morgan.
Thank you, Brother Caffey. I have a slideshow. Let me see here. Uh-oh. I think my screen share is not working. Oh, there we go. Can y'all... All right, y'all see me? Can y'all see my my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Many people who know me know that I have a passion for studying African American history, particularly during the slave trade. So that was one of the first issues that Prince Hall Masons fought against from our founding in the 1700s. So my presentation today is focusing primarily on early abolition efforts in the District of Columbia, which is the jurisdiction where I hail from. This document is actually a very, very important piece of Masonic history here in the Mid-Atlantic region. It's actually a very little known document, but this is a forged pass for a gentleman by the name of Joseph Dozier. Dozier was a enslaved man. He was owned by a woman named Lucy Miller, and in 1833, he attempted to escape from the District of Columbia with the assistance of a Mr. John W. Prout. John W. Prout is very important here in the District of Columbia because he is actually the first known African American Freemason in Washington, D.C., and he was the first worshipful master of Social Lodge number 1. At the time, it was Social number 7 when it was first founded. Prout was initiated, passed, and raised in Laurel Lodge number 2 in his hometown of Philadelphia, and when he moved here to the District of Columbia to marry his wife, he actually became an educator, a schoolmaster, and was also an agent of the Underground Railroad along with many of his comrades at that time. Something very interesting that occurred, however, was that when they were found out, Joseph Dozier was recaptured, and Prout was arrested and dragged into court in front of Judge William Cranch. Cranch was actually a nephew of President John Adams, first cousin of John Quincy Adams. And the thing that I kind of found interesting about this case and a number of other court cases that occurred with early Prince Hall Masons here in the District of Columbia is that these brothers are constantly being arrested for things like this: forging freedom passes, helping escaping slaves, etc. But they keep getting very light sentences. In Prout's case, he was actually shown some favor because there was a U.S. prosecutor at the case by the name of Francis Scott Key, who we should know wrote the Star Spangled Banner, who was the prosecuting attorney. And Francis Scott Key actually just attempted to introduce handwriting evidence, introduce this document along with other documents in John Prout's own hand, but Judge Cranch refused to admit them as evidence. It was found that Prout could be held liable for repayment of the full value of the enslaved gentleman, Mr. Dozier, to the amount of $600, which of course was a lot more money at that time than it is today, but still, nonetheless. What ended up occurring was that Judge Cranch eventually waives that fee, and Prout is given a fine of $50 and allowed to go home. This is, again, unheard of during this is in the year 1833. The Civil War is a full, almost 30 years away. So this is to give an idea of the social importance and impact and what that case would have meant to the black community at that time, who was still suffering under the oppression of the American slave trade. One of John Prout's close friends and advisors and brothers in his lodge, someone who I talk about a lot, William Custis Costin. Costin was, as I said, Prout was the first master of Social Lodge number 1. Costin was actually the third master of that lodge. William Costin was actually a nephew of Martha Custis Washington, the very first lady of the United States, the wife of George Washington. He was born and raised on Mount Vernon Estate in Virginia. Following the he eventually came here to the District of Columbia and as a free man, and he himself began working with the Bank of Washington. He became very well known in the upper classes and the upper echelons of society here in the District of Columbia because he handled a lot of money for a lot of very important people, including presidents, future presidents, senators, etc. Something to note about Costin, though, was that he had been in D.C. since the year but in 1821, the District of Columbia passed the Washington, D.C. Black Codes, which was basically, in a nutshell, was an effort to try to push free blacks out of the city proper. They initiated such laws as trying to outside their homes after 6 p.m. and things that you had to. And the big issue was that for every free black person in the District of Columbia had to find 3 white people who would have a financial tie to them and who would vouch for their character and their behavior in the District of Columbia. William Costin actually goes to court. Ironically, he goes in front of Judge William Cranch once again, and he says, well, I've been in D.C. for all these years, issue or anything, you can't take my rights. And he fights this case, and he eventually wins it to some degree. What Judge Cranch basically rules is that any free black in the District of Columbia who had been here prior to the law being passed, and they did not have to abide by those laws. something that I've uncovered in my research was that following this court case, some of the manumission papers that, again, John W. Prout is still doing his thing. Some of those manumission papers that John W. Prout was writing, he actually was backdating them very early, which was something I kind of thought was an interesting trend to kind of see for further research. So these are individuals, again, that have an important tie personally as well as economically to seeing their fellow people of African descent freed, and as well as socially. Something else to note about William Costin, if anyone is familiar with George Washington's history, you might know the story of Oney Judge, who was probably one of Washington's more famous enslaved persons. Oney Judge escaped from George Washington's home in Philadelphia. She ran up north and was a free woman. George Washington tried to capture her, to bring her back, but he was unsuccessful, and she lived out her days as a free woman in the north. She was actually William Costin's sister-in-law. So again, this is a personal. One thing I love talking about historically is family ties, and that's something we're going to get into as I move forward with the next couple of slides before I finish my section. Here we have two other individuals who had a great impact here in the District of Columbia. Again, as I said earlier, I love talking about families and showing how activism really is a family affair, especially when you're dealing with the slave trade and fighting Jim Crow. Here we have John F. Cook Sr. And most worshipful past Grand Master John F. Cook Jr., obviously father and son. John F. Cook Sr. was actually he was a minister here in the District of Columbia. We do not know if John F. Cook Sr. was a Prince Hall Mason or not. I fall into the camp of people. I actually do believe that he was an early Prince Hall Mason. I cannot document that. Those documents are not extant. But he definitely was one of those. He was definitely a part of that same class of people. We do know that he was a William Costin and other individuals. What ends up happening is that in the year 1835 in Washington D.C. there was it's little known today, but it's called the Snow Riot. And what basically occurred was that there was alleged that a gentleman by the name of Beverly Snow, who owned a restaurant, he had disrespected a white woman here in the District of Columbia, and a mob of white men basically attacks any black that they can see within eyesight, particularly members of the Masonic Order, or if they weren't members at the time, they would become members, such as William Wormley, John W. Prout, William Costin, John F. Cook. But John F. Cook Sr. actually was, and there's a newspaper article, John F. Cook Sr. actually was public enemy number one. He was actually the number one activist that they wanted. However, he escaped to Philadelphia. His son, John F. Cook Jr., as far as my research goes, this is actually the point in the written historical record where John F. Cook Jr. actually enters child being carried off to Philadelphia for his own safety. And I really believe that kind of impacted past Grand Master John F. Cook quite a bit as he grew in his activism later on in later years. Most worshipful past Grand Master John F. Cook Jr. Actually, he has a lodge named after him. He actually doubled the size of the D.C. jurisdiction when he became Grand Master in the 1870s after having served as Grand Secretary. He also was one of the first blacks in a delegation, which I'm going to talk about in a second, to be invited formally to the White House to discuss President Lincoln's plan for immigration to try to get free blacks to leave America, go to Panama, go to Haiti, go to Liberia, but get out of America. And John F. Cook Jr. was one of the people who actually fought against that, representing the Prince Hall Masons as well as Black America. So little known story, but very, very important to understand. In March of 1848, the most worshipful Union Grand Lodge, now the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of D.C., formed. Something that's connected to that event is that 1 month later, there was an incident called the Pearl attempt, or the Pearl escape, which was, the Pearl was a ship that was commandeered by a gentleman named Captain Daniel Drayton. Captain Drayton and several other white and black abolitionists, this was a coalition effort, actually the largest attempted slave escape from the District of Columbia's history. Here we have Amelia and Emily Edmondson. They were two of probably the most popular escapees from that attempt. The plan was that this ship would leave from Washington, D.C. and head to Philadelphia. Again, we see the connection, Washington, D.C. heading to Philadelphia. And we know from our Prince Hall Masonic history that the flow of Masonry came from Boston to Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. So you see there's a network here. That ship actually runs into bad winds, and they end up being recaptured by a ship and brought back to District of Columbia. Many of the enslaved persons are reclaimed by their owners. Many are put on the auction block, including the Edmondson sisters. The Edmondson sisters actually came from a mixed family in terms of some of their new immediate family, like their parents were free, some of their siblings were enslaved. So that that should give you an idea of how slavery really broke up families. The Edmondson sisters were actually sent to New Orleans to be sold as New Orleans at that time was very popular for the sex trade, and these two girls being teenagers, that was probably what they were destined for. Paul Edmondson, their father, actually travels to New York and to Philadelphia and Ohio. He joins up with Frederick Douglass and other activists, a lot of whom were Prince Hall Masons, to try to free his daughters. This becomes a very big newspaper story at the time. The girls actually were sent to New Orleans right after their father had got the money to free them. And of course, they didn't have cell phones or anything like that, so they're sent to New Orleans still at risk of being sold. Eventually, they are brought back to the District of Columbia. They actually had found so again, to show you how the slave trade was, when they were in New Orleans, they actually found their brother, who they had long lost because he had been sold off. They eventually do come back to Washington, D.C., and they become outspoken activists. They both enroll in college eventually. The older daughter, Amelia, ends up passing away. Excuse me, not Amelia, Mary, excuse me, ends up passing away, but Emily lives a very long life. She died in 1895. Again, to show this family connection, how Prince Hall Masonry served the community and how we were always connected to the struggle of African American people. Emily Edmondson, who's here seated, if you can see me moving the mouse around, Emily Edmondson is actually the great-grandmother of John H. Painter. Painter actually was a past master. He was a member of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of D.C., and he served as our CCFC. In the year 1930, John H. Painter actually wrote what I believe is the first full-length book on this story of the escape from the Pearl, and he wrote it in large part from recollections of his conversations with his great-grandmother. So again, this is a personal story that Prince Hall Masonry has always fought for. Last but not least, this is past Grandmaster John T. Costin. John T. Costin was the son of William Costin, one of his children. He was the second Grandmaster here in the District of Columbia, and John T. Costin, I think, represents that class of men who were alive at that time, again, going into the Civil War. He's an early Republican activist here in the District of Columbia, and he also was a member of the Freedmen's Bureau, and he traveled throughout the South educating free blacks and helping set up schools, educating them on voting rights, and he eventually heads to Georgia, where he joins the state legislature and helps rewrite the Georgia Constitution during Reconstruction. And with that, I thank you for your attention. Let me take this screen share off. And are we back?
Slowly but surely, brother.
Slowly but surely. Oh yeah, I see. This thing is tripping.
Yeah. You're good. Yep.
All right, we good. Cool. Thank you for your attention. I hope that that was enlightening for everybody.
All right. Thank you, Brother Morgan, and Brother Gillon.
Yes, sir. I guess I will jump right into this presentation. All right. Am I good to go now?
Yep.
All right. Jumping right into this. The topic is going to be Prince Hall Masons that fought for justice in America. But I'll also like to mention those Prince Hall Masons whose death led to a greater cause. First person I'd like to mention is past Master William K. Donegan, who was a member of Central Lodge No. 3 in Springfield, Illinois. Past Master Donegan was beat up, had his throat cut, and hung in 1908. Had a throat cut and lynched in 1908. He was drugged across the street where he hung all day till the National Guard cut him down. His death became a catalyst in the formation of the NAACP. The second person I'd like to mention is Brother Jimmy Lee Jackson. He was a member at Goshen Lodge number 132A in Marion, Alabama. Brother Jackson was a Vietnam veteran, and if you're familiar with or if you've seen the movie Selma, or you're familiar with the story, Brother Jackson was the person that was shot by the Alabama State Trooper. His death led to the Selma to Montgomery March, and we all know the story about the voting rights and everything that happened in Selma, but that all happened after the death of Brother Jimmy Lee Jackson. Now, as I was starting to think about what person I was going to talk about tonight, I started thinking about all the Georgia Masons and everything they did. I thought about Dr. Henry Rutherford Butler, when in 1922 he went to the governor of Georgia to ask for justice for the members of our Grand Lodge who were being killed while trying to attend meetings. And we also had some of our lodges burned down. Thought about past Grandmaster John Wesley Dobbs and everything he did for voting rights, getting blacks hired in Atlanta, or blacks hired as state troopers in Georgia, and all things he did for blacks during this time. Thought about Andrew Young, Reverend James Orange, John Wesley Dobbs, John H. DeVoe, and I could have went down a list with Georgia Masons, but this person, I'm actually going outside the box. And I usually talk about Georgia Masons all the time, but this one will not be about a Georgia Mason. This is actually about Brother Augustus Freeman Hawkins, who was a member of Western Knights Lodge number 67 under the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of California. Brother Hawkins was affectionately called Gus, and as you see from the picture, was very light-skinned, and at times he would be mistaken for a white man. Brother Hawkins was born in 1907 in Shreveport, Louisiana. In 1918, he moved to California, where he later graduated from high school and the University of California in 1931. Brother Hawkins was a member of the California State Assembly from 1935 to 1963, and in 1963 he was elected to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. This made him the first black congressman from California and the first black elected west of the Mississippi River. Now, Brother Hawkins was originally a member of Guardian Lodge number 50, but he demitted to Western Night Lodge, where his hometown friend from Louisiana happened to serve as worship master at the time. From researching Brother Hawkins' life, I see two big things that stood out to him. One was education, the second one was employment. Brother Hawkins' champion was Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is known as No Child Left Behind. Brother Hawkins wanted to ensure that every child received a proper education by law. His thought process: we get the children educated, they would grow up to be some productive, and our black, especially the African American children, would not be discriminated against legally in schools. They would receive the same amount of education as other students. And when I started looking at the stuff that he did for employment, I was brought back to a document that I saw, and it was mentioned by a guy named Moses Gardner. Moses Gardner in 1865 in Augusta, Georgia, was talking to the Freedmen's Bureau. And the stuff that he said to the Freedmen's Bureau, he told them that if they gave blacks the same opportunities as whites, if you gave us the same job opportunities, you gave us the same amount of education, if you gave us the same amount of pay, we could maintain our own communities. We can take care of ourselves. We can maintain our own hospitals. We can do all these things on our own if you just gave us the same chance as you gave whites. So maybe Brother Hawkins was inspired by stuff like that when he sponsored the passing of Title VII of the 19th Civil Rights Act, which established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This made it illegal for employers to discriminate against you based on your sex, race, color, national origin, or religion. Brother Hawkins felt that if he could get blacks employed and stop the discrimination against the workplace against black people, that will further the civil rights movement. Because now you will have blacks that will have jobs, they will have money, they will be able to take care of their own families, they wouldn't need anything, they will be productive citizens of the community. So that was something Brother Hawkins always stressed on, was employment and getting blacks from being discriminated against in the workplace. Brother Hawkins co-sponsored over 300 pieces of legislation in this career, well, during his career. I won't go through the entire list here on this presentation, but one thing that I would like to point out, and maybe it's important to me because I am a veteran, is in the 1970s, he forced the Defense Department to reinvestigate the Brownsville raid. The Brownsville raid involved members of the 25th Infantry Regiment. It was an all-black infantry regiment. They were accused of crimes that they did not commit and were subsequently dishonorably discharged from the Army. Well, Brother Hawkins sought to get their convictions overturned and get them all posthumously honorably discharged. Dorsey Willis was the only surviving member of the 25th Infantry Regiment. And on January 10th, 1974, he received a $25,000 check because of Brother Hawkins' efforts. Now, Mr. Willis stated that he was appreciative of this money, but it came far too late. A lot of his people that he had served with had already died. They did not get the benefits that they deserved in their life. But he was still appreciative of Brother Hawkins' effort, and now he was honorably discharged and received a little birthday money. Another thing that's the reason why the 25th Infantry Regiment is important to me. They were also stationed for a period of time in Fort Benning, Georgia. And Brother Morgan mentioned it on the last show about Joseph Walk's book, Black Square and Compass. If you have that book, you'll see where he mentions military lodges, and there was a military lodge attached to the 25th Infantry Regiment by the name of Tyree Military Lodge number 143. So I started checking my lodge minutes, and I saw where that particular lodge had visited my lodge on several occasions. And my lodge had visited them. We used to give each other lectures, help each other out with degree work. So that lodge and my lodge worked hand in hand for a number of years. But it was Brother Hawkins' effort that got these members that got their discharges overturned, and they became honorably discharged from the Army. Brother Hawkins retired from Congress in 1991, and he died on November 10th, 2007 in Bethesda, Maryland, and he was 100 years old at the time of his death. Brother Hawkins had a lot of quotes during his lifetime. One quote that particularly sticks out is, "The leadership belongs not to the loudest, not to those who beat the drums or blow the trumpets, but to those who day in and day out in all seasons work for the practical realization of the world, those who have the stamina to persist and remain dedicated." So this concludes my presentation on Brother Hawkins. Feel free to research him a lot. He did a lot of tremendous things throughout his career.
Thank you, Brother Gillard. And up next.
And thank you, Brother Caff.
All right. Up next, Brother Collins.
Before Ken speaks, Dave, you mentioned you were a vet. Do you want to share what branch of service you were in for the people?
All right. I was United States Army. Actually, when I got out of the Army, I was HAC 269 Armor Regiment, 3rd Infantry Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, Fort Benning, Georgia, and my MOS was 11 Charlie. And for those that don't know, that's indirect fire infantryman or mortarman. We blew up stuff.
There it is. All right, Brother Collins.
All right, everybody, can you see it? Can you see it? We good to go?
Not yet.
Yeah, we're good to go yet. Share. Bear with me 1 second. Get the screen share up and running. You coming up yet?
I don't see it yet.
Okay. Just pop me down the last, brother Kathy.
Okay, I got you.
All right.
Okay, so I'm gonna start a very brief presentation right now, and it's on. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, yes, I see it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it's actually on for the Charles Henry Langston, uh, who was and I'll get to the connection, the personal connection that I have with him near the end of the presentation. But Brother Langston was born free on a Virginia plantation in the early 1800s. He was the son of a wealthy white planter and his common law African and Native American wife. Before his death, his father, Ralph Quarles, arranged for his friend, who was a Quaker, to be made guardian of his children after both of the parents had died. So the parents died in around 1833, and then the friend moved with the boys to Chillicothe, Ohio, from Virginia. In 1835, he and his brother Gideon were the first African Americans to attend Oberlin College in Ohio. Oberlin was actually the first American institution of higher learning to regularly admit female and black students. Within Ohio, Oberlin was considered to be the center of abolitionist movement, as well as a prominent stop on the Underground Railroad. After graduating from Oberlin, Brother Langston quickly became involved in black political affairs in Ohio. Having lived in Oberlin and having absorbed that thought process, he really saw the need to become politically active. And his father actually left his entire inheritance to him and his two other brothers. So that allowed him to really focus his time, because he although he worked a few jobs, he oops, sorry, obviously we're having some technical difficulties. Just one moment. Okay. All right. So obviously only the first slide was playing, so let me go back here.
Try to hit play slideshow. It should work
Okay.
now.
All right. How's that?
No,
Changing, or is it still the same?
no, it's still the same. We apologize everybody for these little glitches.
Okay.
Try to work them out.
All right. Well, I'll continue with the presentation without the photos. It's mainly primarily photos, but what Brother Langston, like I said, he became very active on the Underground Railroad movement after graduating from Oberlin College. He also involved himself in the political affairs within Ohio. And again, this was allowed because of the large inheritance that he received from the death of his parents. It also he was appointed actually the Western representative of the Sons of Temperance in 1848, which was a brotherhood of men who promoted the temperance movement and mutual support. The group was founded around 1842. Charles capitalized on his appointment to promote education and the political rights, as well as moderate habits within the African American community in Ohio. He also served as president of the Black State Convention in 1849. Not only was he active, but Brother Langston introduced his younger brother, Brother John Mercer Langston, to his political circles. He helped John be admitted to the state convention in 1850 when he was only 20 years old. For John, it was the start of a career that actually overshadowed Charles in political offices. John Mercer Langston was an abolitionist, an attorney, educator, activist, diplomat, and politician. He was the first dean of the law school at Howard University. He was also the first president of what is now Virginia State University, and he was also a Prince Hall Freemason as well. In 1858, an event occurred that would actually change the landscape of the abolitionist movement as well as the political landscape within America. The Oberlin-Wellington rescue had far-reaching consequences, according to John Langston's biographers, William and Amy Lee Cheek. It would inject new emotional fervor into the anti-slavery movement, according to them, and it would also reinvigorate the Ohio black movement and critically affect the Republican Party's evolution and standing in Ohio, and by extension in the northern parts of the country. Charles Langston would emerge as an anti-slavery hero, and John Langston would achieve new recognition as a black leader and black Republican. An individual by the name of John Price, who was an actual resident of Oberlin, was kidnapped by a group of federal marshals and deputy sheriffs and slave catchers on September 13, 1858. He was taken to a neighboring town of Wellington, which had rail connections with several large cities in Ohio and Kentucky. Charles Langston and a group of white and black men went to Wellington to free Price. They returned with him to Oberlin, where the Underground Railroad hid Price and then helped transport him to Canada and eventually to his freedom. The rescue captured the national attention. It appeared in all the major newspapers at that time throughout the country, and the President of the United States even demanded that the rescuers be prosecuted. A grand jury indicted 37 men, among them 12 free blacks, in response to what happened. The state arrested the U.S. Marshals and his team. So the state then began to negotiate with the federal government, and between both parties, they decided that only Charles Langston and Simon Bushell, who was a white man that assisted in the escape, were to be tried for their part in subverting the 1850 fugitive slave law. The state released the arresting party, and the federal government released the 35 men. Charles was sentenced to 20 days in jail and fined $100 in court costs. In 1862, Charles Langston left Ohio and he moved to Kansas. Shortly after arriving, he started a school for the increasing black population at that time. A lot of blacks were coming to Missouri and settling in the city of Kansas during that time. He also began recruiting black soldiers in Kansas and Ohio to fight in the Civil War. Brother Langston also opened a grocery store for black residents in Kansas to spur economic growth within the community. In addition to all of this, he had a statewide political leadership. He was the president of the Colored Benevolent Society, and he also was the founder of the Interstate Library Association. He was associate editor of the local newspaper, the Historic Times, which championed the cause of his race. And Brother Langston was also appointed the principal of the Freedmen's University in Kansas in 1872. Brother Langston died on November 21st, 1892. Masonically, Brother Langston was actually the first worshipful master of my lodge, St. Mark's Lodge number 7 in Columbus. And when he moved to Kansas, he served as most worshipful Grand Master of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas as well. So again, there's a personal connection for me with him being the first worshipful master of my lodge. I apologize for the technical difficulties that I had with some of the photos, but hopefully you got the gist of the information. All right. So, Brother Collins, are you ready?
We should be ready, good to go. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, we're good to go. Okay, so I usually do an overview of the civil rights movement and lecture that I do, and I typically I call it Behind the Veil, Prince Hall Masons and Civil Rights. And with that, I typically talk about how Prince Hall Masons have always been there, in particular in regards to civil rights. You know, when we talk about Prince Hall, a man of African descent who identified himself as African, one of the first registered lobbyists. If we look at what we consider to petition the government, Prince Hall was doing this even before the United States was officially formed. Then we look at Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. These are men that end up being the founding fathers of the AME Church. And what they end up doing, they end up going into a situation where they're trying to do one of the most we consider most humane things of basically worshiping their God, but they're segregated inside of the church, which brings forth it plants the seeds for the AME Church. Then we look at Martin Delany, who is a man ahead of his time, who we talked about in previous issues, previous episodes, with Brother James Morgan has laid out Martin Delany's stance of how strong that black life is, the African is, in his education as well as in the military, as well as dealing with Prince Hall Freemasonry. And James just gave you a brief overview of John T. Costin, you know, and the work that he did to make sure that blacks at least got a shtick at the judicial system and inserting himself in that area. Then we also have PBS Pinchback, the work that he did in Louisiana, serving as one of the highest ranking blacks in the state during a time of turmoil and dealing with Reconstruction. Then we look at Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. You know, again, behind the veil, Prince Hall Freemasons are there doing the work. Bishop Turner actually helped to organize, and I say it in civil rights, is getting blacks actively involved in getting the DC colored troops organized. Then we look at Booker T. Washington, though he started much of his work even before becoming a Mason. The fact that what he did was establishing an institution of higher learning and getting the education process started for African Americans, freed slaves, and also newly freed persons. And also during the early 19th century, after he became a Mason, he used his networks with the Masons in order to push the agenda of ensuring that blacks have some type of sodality dealing with business. So a lot of times, if we look into some of Alabama's proceedings, we end up seeing Booker T. Washington corresponding with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge, apologizing to the Grand Master, saying that he hates that he can't be there with the brothers because he's on business with one of the national bodies that he's working with up in St. Louis. Then we also look at Thurgood Marshall, one of the men who ushered in a new generation of education and the concept of using the courts to push most of our issues. And then we go back, I always come back to the great state of Alabama when we start talking about A.G. Gaston, one of the men who quietly funded the civil rights movement that people really didn't know about, one of the richest black men in America that people rarely knew very much about. But the one person that I happen to have a penchant for is the Congressman John Lewis out of Georgia, who is affectionately called the boy from Troy. He's a Prince Hall Mason. He's a civil rights icon. He's a congressman for the greater area of Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the reasons that the dapper-looking gentleman in the middle, if you guys can see, that's myself. And I used to, when I first moved to Washington, I actually served as the congressman's press secretary. That's why his participation is so important to me. And on the left is somebody who kind of identifies with the concept of the human struggle. That's Paul Rasenambinge. He's the gentleman who Don Cheadle played in Hotel Rwanda. So we'll go ahead and get into the the topic of Congressman Lewis. He's nicknamed the Boy from Troy. Born in February 1940, grows up in a small area called Carter's Quarter over in Troy, Alabama. Grew up like most people during that time, the offspring of sharecroppers, really humble people. Congressman Lewis, as he grows older, he ends up moving to Nashville to attend American Baptist Theological Seminary. And when he's there, he ends up getting involved in what he calls good trouble. And that good trouble is the birth, and it's really the early vestiges of the modern day, what we consider the modern day civil rights movement. When Brother Lewis ends up in Nashville, he ends up meeting a man named Jim Lawson, and Jim Lawson is one of the whom myself as well as others considered one of the philosophical backbones of the modern day civil rights movement. He ends up working with most of the students that end up with the formation of SNCC. And with his work with Congressman Lewis as well as others, they end up getting a philosophical development on a better nation, a better America, how government is supposed to work. And then they also get introduced to what's called the Gandhian nonviolent philosophy. That's where civil disobedience is the key to making change instead of fighting. Time and time again, revolution often wears the clothing or cloth of a gun and a sickle, but with the Gandhian philosophy, it's love and civil disobedience. Early on, the gentleman, Congressman Lewis, he ends up involved with becoming first dealing with trying to desegregate the lunch lines. And then he gets actively involved with youth activism with the Freedom Riders. And he's actually on the front line of the Freedom Rides. And if we, again, no pun intended, I'd like to talk about the state of Alabama, but we have to really get into what's really going on in Alabama, because Alabama is the hotbed for the civil rights movement and what's actually going on. So we end up seeing the Freedom Rides, just to give you a backdrop of Alabama. You're dealing with the Freedom Rides, you're dealing with desegregation. They're trying to integrate the University of Alabama. Governor George Wallace is blocking the door, keeping the students from coming in. Congressman Lewis was originally supposed to transfer to go back to Troy when he was at American Baptist Theological Seminary. However, after a meeting with his parents said they didn't want him to do that, because you have to remember, in those times they were sharecroppers, so they lived on white lands, and then they also, the credit that they needed to get the seed to produce the foods for the year, he was really afraid that it would end up impacting the parents. And one of the quotes that he ends up talking about, both personally and as well as in his book, he says that he did not want to put that fight for his parents. It wasn't their fight. So that's when he decided to stay up there in Nashville and start getting trained and get more education on actually getting involved. And when Congressman Lewis in 1957, he ends up sending letters to Attorney Fred Gray, who's actually Martin Luther King's personal attorney, and who's actually the catalyst behind a lot of the early legal strategies for the Montgomery bus boycotts, as well as working with Dr. King. Congressman Lewis corresponds with him saying, I want to get actively involved. This is something that I'm really interested in. So he ends up working with Attorney Gray, and they ended up bringing Attorney Gray as well as Reverend Fauntroy. They end up bringing him to Montgomery, where he meets Martin Luther King, and it's the funniest story that he tells. He says he walks in, and Dr. King is sitting down, and he stands and he says, "Are you John Robert Lewis, the boy from Troy?" And he stands up and he says, "I am John Robert Lewis." He says his entire name because he's actually face to face with one of the most prolific figureheads in the civil rights movement in the country. and that was his first introduction to who he was going to become, to actually becoming the civil rights icon we have today. And as the civil rights movement is moving forward ahead, Brother Gillon talked about Jimmy Lee Jackson, a member of Goshen Lodge number 132 out of Marion, Alabama. He's the death. Even though we had the three missing um, civil rights workers in Mississippi, you also have Viola Liuzzo in Montgomery. You have Jimmy Lee Jackson, who actually ignites the spark that actually pushes for change in the civil rights movement. And it's actually not even, I want to say almost a week to the day before the actual Bloody Sunday march. Now, Bloody Sunday was actually the march, and there was a little bit of internal strife between SNCC as well as the SCLC. SNCC is the more radical young bodies that wanted to push and move forward. Again, the movie Selma, even though it's just a snippet and artistic representation, if you take a look at Congressman Lewis's book, Walking with the Wind, you'll actually see what ends up happening with what's going on. You have the SNCC who's been on the front lines. They've been down there registering people to vote. Now we have a death that's occurred, and Reverend King ends up leaving, and then they end up going ahead anyway. So when they go up on when they go for Bloody Sunday, Congressman Lewis, as well as his cohorts, they meet on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is one of the most memorable moments of the civil rights movement, and it actually pushes things over the edge, and it opens it up to the entire world, because it's actually, not only are they seeing it on video, but they're also getting a radio broadcast of what's actually going on. And the iconic picture here on the right of Congressman Lewis being beaten by one of the state troopers is what really puts a face of the civil rights movement in front of everyone. The Edmund Pettus Bridge will forever be one of the most highlighting moments of Congressman Lewis's his background, because that's the place where they organized everyone, and what really pushed the nation over the edge. And the other picture is the one on the left is the original picture. The one on the right is this past year for the anniversary. And when we talk about, Congressman Lewis's participation, this is something I think, as far as the craft, is really important, because the craft is typically ran by older gentlemen. Congressman Lewis was the young kid at the table who was actually organizing hundreds of, well, I'll say not say hundreds of thousands, but he's organizing thousands of students across the country to get actively involved. He's a member of the Big Six. And then we also look at, he's actually at the table when they're talking about the March on Washington, the 1963 March on Washington. So he's there with President Kennedy. He actually gets an opportunity to speak with him. And when he does speak at the march, he had a speech prepared, but they had to tone it down because his speech was so radical, because the students were saying that they're tired of it. They did not want to just go along to get along, to say kumbaya. But after that, Congressman Lewis ends up, and again, I wanted to shorten this up a little bit so we could have a little bit more time to discuss some of the questions. We also have the conversations of Congressman Lewis. After he leaves office, he ends up doing a lot of work throughout voters registration throughout the South, voters education, ends up going to Africa, spending some time in Africa, doing a little work there. But what we end up seeing, he ends up running for office because, in the civil rights movement, after the civil rights movement, we're looking into the 70s and the 80s. Congressman Lewis is competing with one of the brothers, Julian Bond, and the back and forth then, before Brother, God rest his soul, Brother Bond. Brother Bond was the attractive, young, what Congressman Lewis says, the dashing, articulate guy. And Congressman Lewis say, "Hey, I'm just a country boy I'm the boy from Troy." He ends up losing initially, and then he ends up winning. He serves on the local and state level, and then what we end up seeing is Congressman Lewis is elected to Congress. And he's affectionately called the conscience of Congress, where he is the only person from the civil rights movement that's literally impacting civil rights from a legislative body on a national level. Even though we also have Brother Jim Clyburn out of South Carolina. Congressman Lewis was one of the leaders on the front line. But then when we also look at Congressman Lewis ends up becoming like I said, when I worked for the congressman, he ends up becoming a Mason at site. In 1999, he ends up doing the Scottish Rite, becoming the 33rd, and then he was also coordinated as a Sovereign Grand Inspector General. I was extremely happy to be with him in 2009 when he was actually created into the Prince Hall Shriners. But the overarching, philosophy of the civil rights movement is the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and it's something that we still do today regarding the civil rights movement, just to keep the concept and the idea of fighting for civil rights is every time that they have the Bloody Sunday March reenactment, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge gets the brothers together, and then we march with them. And it's one of the most beautiful things. If you get a chance to come, Brother Dave Gillarm was there this past year with me. He actually marched right next to me. And we had over 1,700 brothers and almost, I believe it was 1,200 women there as well. So it was one of the most beautiful sights that you'll ever see. I hope this, like I said, I want to keep this as quickly as possible. That way we can get some questions in.
All right. Thank you, Brother Collins. And, just to piggyback on what you said before we jump into the questions, I remember the first time I heard about and saw the photo of the brothers participating in that march. I believe it was a few years ago when I first saw it, and like you said, it was a very powerful image, and I think just that picture alone told a story. But then when you know the backdrop from some of the folks that you highlighted, and actually some of the earlier brothers that Brother Gillarm highlighted as well, that it really puts everything into perspective. So thank you for that. So as always, we have a few questions before we close it out. This first question is directed toward Brother Gillarm. It says, Dave, has your research led towards any Prince Hall brothers from our area doing anything towards the civil rights movement?
All right, actually, yes. Before we got online, for those who don't know, I'm originally from Mounds, Illinois. Very small, like really small town in southern Illinois, like the very southern tip of Illinois. I was actually going to talk about this book at the end, but might as well do it now. This book, as you can see here, Masonic Abolitionist. The title is called Masonic Abolitionist, Freemasonry, and the Underground Railroad in Illinois. It was written by Right Worshipful Darrell Andrews, who's now the Right Worshipful Grand Treasurer of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Illinois. It talks about all the abolitionists throughout the state, the movement of the Underground Railroad throughout the state, the lodges who was involved, and one person from our area, which I believe is from Brother Valentine, was a guy named John J. Bird, who was also a past Grand Master of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Illinois. He was from Cairo, which is the very southern tip of Illinois, and he was one of the first blacks elected to a public office in the state. Him and a guy, what was his name? William Scott started the Cairo Gazette, and they advertised everything that the blacks were doing. They were trying to boost up John J. Bird's political campaign. He was the one that John J. Bird was advocating to the state of Illinois on behalf of all the blacks, especially in the southern part of the state. So from our area, John J. Bird was the one that was one of the early civil rights leaders.
All right, thank you. All right, and our next question: when it comes to justice, who do we have as greats in today's terms? Do we have anyone who's alive today who did things similar?
Well, you want to take that one, James?
Well, I was just gonna say my number one vote I always go for is Antonio Caffey. That's always my number one. And Dave Gillarm is doing great things. Oh, you're talking about like more famous people.
Yeah, I'm not famous, bro.
I think it's no. Don't sell yourself short. Don't sell yourself short. I think it's important to note that a lot of these individuals as Ken laid out with Congressman Lewis, who actually, I have a tie to Congressman Lewis, a personal tie as well, in that he's from Troy, Alabama, and my mother's father's family is also from Troy. And I got to meet him earlier this year, and he actually confirmed that he was kind of familiar with some of my relatives. So that was kind of a cool experience earlier this year. But one of the things I think is interesting about Prince Hall Masonic history is that a lot of these early civil rights leaders, and even down to today, with even though he's deceased now, with Benjamin Hooks, you having individuals like that, Julian Bond, who recently passed, also. These are Prince Hall Masons who are taking leadership roles not only in the organization but also on the front lines of the human rights struggle as well. So something that was kind of interesting to me as well was finding out that Nelson Mandela, again, he's recently deceased, but that he also had been a member. So yeah.
Now, also just to piggyback off of that, we talk about people who's actually still working on the justice side, even though the names are somewhat controversial. Brother Jesse Jackson, we have Brother Al Sharpton, we still have brothers John Lewis, you still have Brother Jim Clyburn, you have Brother
Charlie Rangel,
William Lacey. You have so many members. You have members of Congress who are actually doing some of this work. Also, one of the brothers by the name works for the NAACP. I worked with him doing some of the drug policy reform work and voter refranchisement. Robert Brooks, he's working with the NAACP, I believe, in their their public policy office. But the brothers are out there. But the thing is, the civil rights movement isn't the civil rights movement of yesterday, where it was a handful of leaders. I think the civil rights movement is more fragmented, and until you get to the big names, until you see the talking heads, you see the Jesse Jackson, you'll end up seeing the Al Sharpton. Those are the major talking heads. But the brothers that are doing the regional work, I don't think that those brothers are being highlighted. But then again, like Congressman Lewis says, that it only takes one person to get in the way and to get in trouble. And I wanted to I forgot to pull the picture up, but I wanted to make, I didn't get time to do it. I wanted to make Congressman Lewis's picture, his arrest picture. I wanted that picture to be the front. Because brothers always say that, if a brother's been arrested, they shouldn't be a Mason. That's the first thing they say. Some of us have been arrested for civil disobedience, and they say, have you been arrested? Yes, I've been arrested, and I'm proud of it, and I'm willing to talk about it. But they ask you what you've been arrested for: getting in trouble, and it's the good type of trouble. Civil disobedience, that's the thing that that's the remnant from the civil rights era of yesterday that's kind of getting into the civil rights era today, but that's the intersect of where are the brothers now? Are you actively involved? What are you working on? I think that things like that are coming along slowly. One guy in Alabama, just in this question, a brother by the name of Kenneth Glasgow is doing work in southern Alabama out of Dothan, and he alone has registered over 18,000 people to vote. And the 18,000 people to vote were ex-felons, people that lost their right to vote. And he's the one that's out there on the front line actually doing some of that work. But again, this happens in areas all across the country, but rarely do they get the national platform to be known as that civil rights leader.
All right, thank you, brother. And the final question of the evening, and I think is very appropriate. What made the brothers choose who they presented on?
I guess I'll take that for me first. First of all, I'm gonna copy my hero Dave Gillarm. I have a book shout out as well. This is Escape on the Pearl. A lot of the details I didn't get into with the Pearl incident. You can find this book. It's written by Mary Kay Ricks, if you can see that there. So it's definitely a good book. It's a thick read, but it breaks it down quite well. For me, I just decided to cover the people who I covered because I wanted to give an idea for brothers to understand that the District of Columbia's Masonic history was very turbulent early on because we're one of the jurisdictions. At the time, we were probably one of the most southern jurisdictions being established in 1848. When you have Baltimore, to the north, and then Alexandria is this big slave port, right smack dab. At the time, it was actually a part of the District of Columbia. That created a dynamic where you have, issues with lodges being, trying to open up and just have regular lodge meetings, but yet the authorities are trying to attack us. I believe it's Social Lodge number 1. They were known for being in a swamp. Felix Lodge number 3 was always getting their meetings busted up. Universal number 2 at the time was out in Alexandria. They were right there down the street from one of the largest slave traders, the Birch slave trader shop. They're down the street. So this is the environment that these people are growing up in, and that they're forming this organization in. But they're next to this seat of power, the White House, the Capitol building, all of these different things that are espousing freedom, but yet there was no freedom for them. So I really wanted to do that to show how the District of Columbia, has grown, and it really is a part of our DNA, especially if anybody's also from DC, like myself, Masonically. This is a part of who we are. Another thing, and then I'll close on this. Another thing I think is important to note is that regardless of where geographically you find these individuals, whether it's today or in the 1800s, 1700s, Prince Hall Freemasons were always a part of the communities in which they lived. So with Dave talking about being from the southernmost tip of Illinois, with Ken talking about brothers from Alabama like Congressman Lewis, with myself I'm a New Jersey native, but I'm here in the District of Columbia. These brothers are not doing this just to do it. They're doing it because, as I showed in my presentation, some of them are former slaves. Their families, you might have a brother who, I'm a free man, but my wife is enslaved at the time. Everybody was affected by the Jim Crow era. So even Prince Hall Freemasonry itself as an organization was affected by racial segregation. So this is something that's not foreign to them. This is an obligation. This is a duty, and everybody had to play a part so we could be where we are today. And I will finish with one last note as well, Brother Caffey, to add on to your presentation. John Mercer Langston was also the first black president of my alma mater, Howard University. He was an interim president, but we say he was the first black president. We don't, we count him. So with that said, thank you.
I'm sorry. Oops, sorry about that. Other brothers, what prompted you to choose the person that you chose for your presentation?
Hey, Jay, I'll jump in on you because I know you about to get it. Dave was going to do Congressman Lewis. I was like, nah. That's the Alabama connection. We got to represent the Roll Tide. But no, honestly, the relationship that I was able to develop with Congressman Lewis over the years has been something that's really been important to me. But not only important to me, but also getting him interacting with the craft as well, with people. Again, I like to talk about some of the issues that involve Freemasonry. When we talk about this stuff, a lot of brothers talk about some of the well-known members that never get a chance to come out to meetings. Congressman Lewis may not be able to make it out to meetings, but you know what? When you ask him to come speak, he's going to be there. Anytime we ask him to come speak, he's there to speak. He'll stay. He'll shake hands. He'll talk to people, and that's why I think that he's a really special person. Even I know he's from Alabama because that all real change out of the United States ends up coming from Alabama. We know that first home of the Confederacy, the first home of the Civil Rights Movement, home of integrating major universities. That's where the precipice is, and he's actually from there, but now he's over in Georgia. So we loaned the congressman to Georgia, but we had Dave down there in his area. So Dave, he might be in Georgia's Grand Lodge, but he's still an Alabama boy as well.
Yeah, and that was it. I had my heart and mind set on Congressman John Lewis. Then Ken said that he was gonna do him, and I immediately switched to brother Andrew Young, and I figured that that was kind of too close to John Lewis. I thought about brother Maynard Jackson, the first black mayor of Atlanta, and the grandson of past Grandmaster John Wesley Dobbs. Um, and then I started really thinking that I can talk about any Georgia Mason and their involvement with civil rights anytime. I do it all. Actually, I do it quite often. So I wanted to kind of think outside the box, and it was actually a conversation with a sister, and she mentioned about California Masons, and she mentioned Augustus Hawkins. And once I started looking into his story, I was like, this guy's pretty interesting, and he did a lot of things that affect us today, especially with the equal employment opportunity. Um, and so that's why I chose him. He was a very unique guy. He did a lot of things. He was very interesting. You look at his story when he ran for office in California. He said that his opponent had sat too long. He needed to go. So that's why he needed to be elected. Then he turns around and sits even longer than that guy ever sat. So Brother Hawkins' story was very interesting, and that's why I chose him. He has a great story.
All right. And I mean, for me, as I said during the presentation, Charles Langston was the first worshipful master of my lodge. And I remember when I first joined and started doing research on the first officers, it was just weird. 20 over a little over 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot of information out there about him. There was more information there was more information out there at that time about his brother John Mercer Langston, who Langston University is named after, and he was actually one of the first African Americans elected to political office in the country. He served as a clerk in Oberlin, Ohio. But slowly but surely, I started finding a lot of information. And the weird thing is, for a long time, I searched for a photo of him, and I could never find it. And I knew that he was involved in the Oberlin Wellington rescue, and I had a picture of all of the folks that were initially arrested. And something told me one day to just look at the picture, and I just saw this guy standing there, and then I found the same picture somewhere else, and they had the folks labeled, as far as who was who, and then lo and behold, Charles Langston was standing right there, and I said I'd had his picture well over 10, 15 years and never knew I had it, until I started putting the pieces together. But he was just a person that he could have, taken the easy way out, as I highlighted during the presentation. He had received a substantial inheritance. He could have purchased a farm and moved there and kept quiet, but he didn't do that. He used his money to, as I again said during the presentation, to give him the flexibility to work even harder. And that brother really, he pushed the button during a time period where it wasn't too good to push buttons. So he's always been a hero of mine, not just Masonically, but what he was able to accomplish during his lifetime. All right. We do have a few more questions, actually. One, and this is an interesting question because it's a recurring theme, but I like the question because I think it's something that we need to keep talking about and bringing up. Why is research a taboo in some jurisdictions, and what is being done to combat the superstitions and falsehoods that is prevalent in the miseducation throughout Freemasonry?
I guess I'll take that. I'm going to take the question. I don't really know how to respond to it because I've heard that, but I believe there's something called the First Amendment that people should be very mindful of. I think that there's depending on the state that you're in or the jurisdiction that you're in, I think that brothers sometimes get scared because don't get me wrong, knowledge is power. Okay, so regardless of what state or whatever jurisdiction you may be a member in, knowledge is power. So if you know Masonic precedent in terms of history or whatever the case may be, then maybe there are certain rules or certain things that you realize that aren't correct, or maybe things that you're doing that really should not be being done. I really don't know, because I'm very anti-censorship. I mean, from my academic background, just my personality, and again, like I said, I mean, there's something called the First Amendment. There's something called academic freedom. So if put it like this is my mentality. If past grandmaster such and such from, I'm not going to talk about nobody today, but from way back in the day, did something, and it's documented, and you want to read about it, write about it, whatever the case may be, that, you're reporting the facts as you know them to be. I'm not telling you to go out here and libel or slander anybody, but I am saying that that's what I do. As a historian myself, these are the facts as I know them to be. As I said earlier with John F. Cook Sr., I don't know that he was a Prince Hall Mason in terms of documentation. That's my belief. But when I see documentation that this is what happened, then that's what happened. And I think that anybody in leadership who might try to make whoever, I'm not sure who asked the question, but whoever feels that's a taboo, I mean, maybe they shouldn't be doing some of the things that they're doing. I mean, history is history. And the bottom line is, I'll close with this, is that within the Prince Hall, or within the Masonic world period, we should be happy that brothers in our organizations, in our lodges, and sisters in the chapters as well, are interested in doing the research and finding it out and putting everything in proper context. Because if you don't, somebody else will. I mean, are you going to tell somebody from Harvard or Yale? Like, there's a book out, All Men, Free and Brethren. That was not written by Prince Hall Masons. You're going to tell these people that they can't write? Of course you're not. I mean, yeah. So I'll kind of end with that before I say something and get in trouble.
I wanted to throw 2 cents on. Oh yes, shameless plug. We talked about the books. There's a book called "Walking in the Wind: A Memoir of the Movement." Sorry, guys. This is Congressman Lewis's memoir about the movement. But just to jump on that, the one thing that we're starting to see, and that's from a lot of the historians, that even when we interact with each other, some people are against. Again, some people / jurisdictions may be adverse to research and institutional knowledge for the reasons that James laid out. But at the same time, there are those who use their knowledge and background on Masonic jurisprudence the wrong way. There's a way to present information. I guess it's a twofold. That sword cuts both ways. Whereas I was labeled as being a know-it-all, and I wish I was, but that's not the case. But what we have to make sure that we do when you're asking for information, and some Grand Lodges, and I'll lay it out there. I think I said in another episode, some Grand Lodges will not let you have access to the information, for one, because brothers get in there and they in some of those libraries and they stick stuff in books and they leave with it. That's one thing. Two, some people get stuff and then they tear it up. And then the major issue with and we keep talking about how do you combat the falsehoods. There are some seasoned and looked up to brothers in leadership positions that continue to foster incorrect information in terms of Prince Hall Masonic history. I recently read a Grand Lodge history on Prince Hall Freemasonry, and it says that Prince Hall is a provincial Grand Master. And we can go ahead. I want to go ahead and put that out here. Prince Hall was never a provincial Grand Master from the Grand Lodge of England. Never. It never happened. There's no proof.
Blasphemy.
It's never happened. So whoever's told you that, because past master, it is a lie. It is an absolute lie. That's one of the biggest falsehoods that's ever been passed down from Prince Hall Freemason. He was never a provincial Grand Master. He was never a Grand Master. He was acknowledged as a Grand Master. That's all. And I hope I said that the right way, Brother Gillum. I just need a nod. Did I say that the right way? Brother Kafey, did I say it the right way? Brother Morgan, I just need a nod. Prince Hall was never a provincial Grand Master. There is nothing to prove that he was ever a provincial Grand Master. He was never appointed. He never had a patent of authority. Furthermore, he was never a Grand Master. He was never elected a Grand Master. So now that we have that baseline down, now they acted as a Grand Lodge. Now the next thing is also we need to learn the jurisprudence. That's the big piece as well. Masonic jurisprudence, which you find inside of proceedings. You find it inside the proceedings, but you also find it inside of Masonic literature. That's where you start to learn that stuff. That's how you guys can get around some of this research stuff. Learn the Masonic jurisprudence. It'll get you through that's the history to me. But I'm off.
All right. Closing statements. Again, during this time, their brothers want to any parting words regarding either tonight's show or anything that you have working on or upcoming. Brother Gillarm.
All right, definitely. I guess to add my 2 cents about that question, and of course I'll make my comments very brief and they're gonna be very blunt. One reason I feel that research is taboo in some jurisdictions, because now you asking questions, you're gonna make somebody do their job, and they don't want to do their job because they don't want to have to go read anything. So that's why they don't want you to research anything, because now they got to actually go read something, and that can't happen. The second thing about combating misinformation, and there was just a post on, I can't remember what Facebook group it was, a brother's sister-in-law was posting out basically saying that Masons were devil worshippers and all kind of craziness. Tell the people to research the history of the AME Church. And most of these people have Masons in their family. Ask them was they Uncle Pookie a devil worshiper? Because he was probably a Prince Hall Mason. They know Masons in their community. Ask them what do these people do in their lives? So that's what I do. I tell them research the AME Church. I give them my uncle, Ari Dickinson Jr. Do you think he's a devil worshiper? Everybody around here that knows my uncle knows the type of man that he is. But I guess parting comments, the book again, Masonic Abolitionist. I'm born and raised in Illinois. And by reading this book by Daryl Andrews, I learned so much about the history of Masonry in Illinois. I learned the history of my area, Fort Defiance, and everything they had going there. This was an amazing book about history of Prince Hall Masonry in Illinois. As far as upcoming events, I really don't have anything planned until February. We're planning another Prince Hall history tour. If you came to the first one, the Prince Hall History Tour of Columbus, Georgia, you're definitely going to want to attend this one coming up for Black History Month. And that's really it. Had a great time tonight, learned a lot, and go Cardinals.
Brother Morgan.
Thank you, Brother Caffey. As I said, my shameless plug for tonight was the book Escape on the Pearl by Mary K. Ricks. Definitely a great book of DC history, and I expect all of the new brothers, particularly new brothers in Corinthian 18, to get that book and get cracking. In terms of upcoming events or anything, everybody cannot attend this, obviously, but Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC is having our annual session next week, so that's where I'll be for half of the week because we do what we do. Other than that, only thing I can say is I hope everybody has a happy holiday season and everything. I think our next episode is going to be right after the Christmas holiday, so you all just be safe and travel well, drink responsibly, and if anybody has any other questions or anything for me, you can always contact me. You can email me at jrmorgan919@aol.com, or you can hit me on Facebook, James Morgan III, and I'm always available to answer any kind of questions that folks have. Other than that, Godspeed.
Thank you. And Brother Collins.
I can't get off here without saying roll tide to everybody. Devastating, outstanding win from the Alabama Crimson Tide. But no, seriously, again, this is great. I love the conversations that we're having. Given the current climate with Prince Hall Freemasonry, I'm always one that says that, you know, we need to learn the jurisprudence of how things work. And that's across the board. Once we learn jurisprudence and how things work as far as Prince Hall Freemasonry and how Freemasonry period works, that's how things will start to go better. And then when you have conversations on different topics, cite sources. Give brothers sources. Give them sources. You know, even highlight and underline and let them read it for themselves. Because what I hope that, you know, as we keep going forward and we start looking towards the future, what we don't do is we get out of that because brother X and Y Z said so. Crack that book open, actually take a look at it, and once you actually start reading that stuff, you'll find some really great information in there, and you'll actually start to like history. You know, it might not be a historian, but you actually like reading, period, just to hear what these men were saying. Reading some old proceedings not even too long ago, where in the way that these men wrote the words, how eloquent their speech was, and some of these men were slaves. They were previously slaves, and people say that the slave was ignorant, shiftless. These are some of the most educated and most eloquently spoken men, even until this day. So, you know, that's the done thing. Also, I want everybody to mark their calendars. March 6th, 2016, in Selma, Alabama, we're going to be doing the reenactment of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Bloody Sunday bridge crossing in Selma, Alabama. Please be there. Come dressed in your Masonic attire, black and white. And also give your Grandmaster a call to call into our. We're really big about Masonic protocols. Have your contact your Grandmaster. Make sure it's cool. CCFC contact ours, and we're good to go. We want to have as many people out there as possible. Have a great one, and happy holidays, everybody. Roll Tide.
Hey, before Antonio, before we or excuse me, Brother Caffey, before we sign off, I want to make sure I give a shout out to Joppa Lodge number 55 up in Harlem, New York. That's actually my lodge's brother lodge. We've been visiting with them for over 50 years. Last night I actually attended their communication up in Harlem, and then I sped back down on the Amtrak to get here to D.C. so I could be here live with you all. But I wanted to give a special shout out to Worshipful Master James E. Smith, Right Worshipful Gary T. Davis, Eric Yannis, especially Brother Prescott Harris. Brother Harris and I, you know, we were hanging out all day yesterday in Harlem, and we went to the African burial ground. You know, we did that. We went up to Harlem, checked out, got a boatload of new books and things, and it was just a great time visiting with the brothers. So, you know, I love those guys. And if you want to have myself or any of the brothers on this panel to come to your lodge, hit us up. Let us know. You know, we'll come out and speak. You know, if it's okay with your Grandmaster, your district deputy, whatever, we'll come out. But but hit us up and let us know, and we'll try to make that happen also. So, thank you.
Definitely. And thank you, brothers. You know, as I stated near the beginning of the show, you know, we were only going to be able to present on a few of the brothers that made, you know, a huge impact in society. And I think one thing that Brother Collins hit on, and it's so true, I think even back then and even today, you know, there are countless numbers of brothers whose names we may never know who had and made a major impact on society. You know, I've always looked at, you know, the little things people did and how that, you know, also made an impact. You know, I guess we're conditioned to look at the major things and the big things, and we often sometimes overlook those small things that folks did to just say no, or to say, you know, it should be like this. So, you know, I urge all of you to just, you know, one, be proud of those brothers that stood up for our American rights, and then, you know, also thank those brothers as well, you know, for the privileges and some of the rights that we enjoy today. Thanks for joining us tonight. You know, as always, we've hoped that you've gained some type of insight, you know, on the belief, the battle, the victory, Prince Hall Freemasons that fought for justice in America. As Brother Morgan mentioned earlier as well, please join us on December 27th 2015 at 8:30 p.m. for a special show. We'll be detailing the life and strange times of John G. Jones, his role in the formation of the Shrine, as well as his creation of his very own United Supreme Council, and how that led to not only a rise in clandestine Freemasonry, but it also led to some strange things that we're dealing with even today. So please tune in for that, and as always, good evening.